Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night Podcast. Story 1. The Silent Cries Under the Colorado Home. Hello, I am your horror storytelling expert, and today we begin our chilling series in a place where peace is nothing but a thin veneer. The suburb of Frederick, Colorado, USA. This is where the story of the Watts family, a modern tragedy of betrayal and unimaginable evil, unfolded. It was the summer of 2018. On social media, Shanann Watts, a vibrant, life-loving woman, often posted pictures of her happy family. Shanann, pregnant with their third child, was always smiling next to her seemingly perfect husband, Chris Watts, and their two adorable daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. They were the ideal image of the American dream, a lovely home, a complete family. But no one knew that beneath that perfect facade, a crack was spreading, and it was about to shatter. On August 13th, 2018, Shanann returned home from a business trip. She returned, but never left again. The next morning, a close friend of Shanann's, who came by after failing to reach her, called the police. Shanann and her two daughters had vanished without a trace. Immediately, Chris Watts became known to the community. He appeared on the news, looking distraught, his eyes dry, repeatedly pleading for the return of his wife and children. His voice choked up. "I just want them back. If they're out there, I apologize. I miss everything about them." Audiences across America, including investigators, sympathized with the unbearable pain of the abandoned husband and father. But that very dryness was the first clue. Body language experts noted that Chris was too controlled, too restrained, and most importantly, incapable of shedding a single genuine tear. As investigators began searching the house, they found odd inconsistencies. Shanann's wedding ring was left on the bedside table. She would never leave it behind, and her cell phone, with all her important contacts, was still there. The pressure from the investigation and continuous questioning began to tighten its grip on Chris. In a small interrogation room, under the cold fluorescent light, Chris Watts' story started to crumble. He admitted to having an affair. He lied. And after hours of confrontation, Chris Watts, the perfect husband, finally confessed to a part of the horrifying truth. Chris initially claimed that he and Shanann had a massive fight the night she returned. He wanted a divorce. Shanann refused, and she threatened that he would never see his children again. According to Chris's initial account, he left the room, and when he returned, he found that Shanann had strangled the two girls. In a fit of rage, Chris then strangled his wife. That story, however, was immediately dismissed. Investigators didn't buy it. The police knew Chris was protecting himself, blaming the dead to mitigate his crime. They forced him to tell the truth, and when the truth was revealed, it was far more terrifying than anything imagined. Chris Watts murdered Shanann after an argument about his desire for a divorce to be with his new girlfriend. After strangling his wife right there in their bed, he wrapped her body in a sheet and loaded it into his work truck. Most chillingly, it was at this time that the two little girls, Bella and Celeste, woke up. They saw their mother being carried away. They asked, "What's going on with Mommy, Daddy?" Chris, with sickening coldness, told his daughters that Mommy was sick. He drove the three of them to an oil company property where he worked, about 40 miles away. Here, the story turns into an indescribable nightmare. Chris strangled 3-year-old Celeste first, followed by 4-year-old Bella. Bella, the older girl, struggled, pleading with her father, "Daddy, please don't do this to me." That was the last word of an innocent life. Chris then shoved his children's bodies into large oil storage tanks, where they were submerged in crude oil for days. Shanann's body was buried in a shallow grave nearby. What was the motive of a father, a husband? Simply to be free, to start a new life without commitment? Chris Watts viewed his family as obstacles to be disposed of. The Chris Watts case exposed a painful reality. The killers are often the people we trust the most. The outward perfection can conceal a monster within, a monster willing to drown his children in crude oil merely for a new affair and personal selfishness. Chris Watts was subsequently sentenced to life in prison. But the question that forever haunts us is, how did the silent cries of the two little girls, Bella and Celeste, echo in those final moments when the person they loved and trusted most became their executioner? Story 2. The Wicked Mother and the Plastic Suitcase. We now leave the false prosperity of the American suburbs for a more distant land, a place known for its wild beauty and buried mysteries. South Australia. This story is not just about death, but about betrayal, abuse, and a tragedy that lingered for years under the guise of a missing persons case. In 2015, something chilling was discovered buried deep beside a remote highway near Winarka, South Australia. It was an old green plastic suitcase, and inside were the small skeletal remains of a child. The victim was a little girl, estimated to be between 2 and 4 years old, wrapped in decaying fabric. The police called it the Suitcase Girl case. For months, the Australian public watched in fear and sorrow. Who was this child? Who could discard a tiny life like a piece of garbage? Investigators worked tirelessly to identify the girl from DNA samples and scraps of old clothing. It wasn't until 2016 that justice began to shed light on the darkness. The little girl was identified as Scandalous Pierce, aged 2. But the tragedy didn't end there. The investigation revealed that Scandalous's mother, Carly Jade Pierce Stevenson, had been murdered 2 years earlier, in 2010. Carly's remains were found in a forest near Newcastle, New South Wales. Initially, police could not link the two cases because the mother's body was severely decomposed and abandoned for too long. The horrifying truth covered the years the mother and daughter had been missing since 2008. The man behind both deaths was Daniel Holdham, Carly's boyfriend at the time. Holdham was charged with murdering Carly by strangling her and dumping her body. But what makes this story even more terrifying is the inhuman cruelty perpetrated after Carly's death. Daniel Holdham did not kill Scandalous immediately. After murdering her mother, he kept Scandalous alive for about a week. The most shocking detail: during the years following the pair's deaths, Holdham, with the help of a few accomplices, impersonated Carly. He used Carly's mobile phone and bank cards, sending messages to her family and friends, making everyone believe that Carly and Scandalous were still alive and traveling in remote areas. He even withdrew thousands of dollars from Carly's bank account, exploiting her death to the fullest. In a chilling message sent to Carly's mother, he, posing as Carly, assured her that little Scandalous was fine. This was an ultimate act of deceit, exploiting a mother's and a family's grief for financial gain. So how did Scandalous die? Investigators believe Scandalous was murdered about a week after her mother's death. She was brutally killed, showing signs of severe abuse and assault. Her small body was then stuffed into the plastic suitcase and buried hundreds of kilometers away from where her mother's body was found. It was a desperate attempt to sever the link between the two cases. to completely erase the existence of the mother and daughter. The story of Scandalous and Carly Pierce Stevenson is not just about a serial killer. It exposes a societal rot where a predator can steal the identity, money, and lives of his victims for years. It demonstrates the cold cruelty of a man toward a 2-year-old child, viewing her life as a minor obstacle to be eliminated. And while justice was finally served, the image of that green suitcase by the roadside remains a heartbreaking reminder of the hidden malice within society and the forgotten cries for help from the smallest of lives. Story 3. The Night Hunter of London. We now cross the Atlantic to England, where a night hunter turned loneliness and the need for control into some of the most horrific murders in the nation's history. We transport ourselves to London, England during the late 1970s and early 1980s. This is a story not about domestic violence or financial greed, but about the profound, sick mental decay of a serial killer. His name was Dennis Nielsen. Nielsen was a civil servant, an outwardly ordinary man who lived in apartments in the Muswell Hill and Cranley Gardens areas of North London. He worked in an office, dressed neatly, and was completely unremarkable. But his secret life was a terrifying abyss. Nielsen was a predator. He frequented gay bars or street corners, seeking out young men, often homeless or estranged from their families. Victims he believed no one would look for or report missing. He lured them back to his apartment with offers of alcohol and a place to sleep for the night. Once the victims were drunk or fast asleep, Nielsen would begin his sickening ritual. He would strangle or drown them, satisfying his desire for absolute control, moving them from life to death. For Nielsen, death was not the end, but the beginning of a morbid ceremony. He kept the bodies in his apartment. Sometimes he would place them on the sofa, talking to them as if they were still alive, even dressing them. Nielsen's loneliness was so profound that he needed these dead companions to fill the void. According to his own chilling confession, the number of victims reached at least 15. When the bodies began to decompose, Nielsen had to deal with disposal. His method is one of the most gruesome details of this case. He disposed of body parts by burning them in bonfires, or, more horrifically, he dismembered the corpses and flushed them down the toilet or into the drainage system. The case was discovered purely by accident. In February 1983, residents living in the Cranley Gardens area began complaining about severe drain blockages. The plumber was called in to fix the problem. What the plumber found was not ordinary grease or refuse. Instead, he pulled out fragments of human flesh and bones. He immediately called the police. When officers burst into Nielsen's attic apartment, the horrific stench of death hit them instantly. They found human remains stashed in wardrobes, drawers, and in plastic bags. When arrested, Dennis Nielsen did not resist. On the contrary, he seemed relieved, as if a great burden had been lifted. He calmly, almost proudly, began telling investigators the full story of his horrifying accomplishments. He provided a list of victims, although many of them were never formally identified. Nielsen's confession was a cold portrait of a deeply damaged mind, a man who sought ultimate power through death. He did not kill for money or sex in the conventional sense, but out of a desperate need to control another person, to keep them with him forever in a state of quiet obedience. Dennis Nielsen turned the ordinary streets of London into his nocturnal hunting ground. This case is a stark reminder that the most dangerous psychopaths can be your most polite neighbors, and that the deepest loneliness can lead to the most extreme acts of cruelty. Story 4. the cold-blooded birthday gift. We now move to France, a nation often associated with romance and culture, yet the backdrop for a systematic series of crimes stemming from bottled-up resentment and a persecution complex. This is the story of Gabriel 14, a man who turned personal failure into a death sentence for those he blamed, beginning with his own parents. Gabriel 14 was an educated man, an aerospace engineer by training, who once worked for major technology companies. However, after being laid off in 2006, his life spiraled downward. Fortin grew bitter, convinced that his failures were due to a conspiracy orchestrated by former colleagues and the social system. He began to harbor a deep resentment, meticulously planning his revenge in secret. January 28, 2021, in a quiet village in the Loire-et-Cher region, it was the 70th birthday of his father, Paul Fortin. Instead of a warm celebration, Paul and his wife Mireille received the most brutal gift. Gabriel Fortin arrived at his parents' home. It is unclear what transpired, but he pulled out a gun and shot both his father and mother dead. Their deaths were carried out with chilling composure, showing no signs of struggle or resistance, suggesting a premeditated act. The family tragedy unfolded silently behind closed doors on what should have been a day of happy commemoration. But for Fortin, the death of his parents was only the beginning. Immediately after the murders, he took his car and began an inter-province killing spree. Hours later, hundreds of kilometers away, at the Pôle Emploi employment agency in Valence, Fortin sought out Patricia Pasquian, a former HR manager at one of his previous companies. Pasquian was not directly involved in Fortin's dismissal, but he believed she was part of the system that ruined his life. He shot her dead right at her workplace. The following day, Fortin continued the massacre. He drove to another employment agency and murdered Isabelle Montenegro, another HR consultant. The investigation quickly linked the victims. All four, the parents and the two employment consultants, were connected to Fortin and his career failures. Fortin was not killing randomly. This was a targeted murder case, carried out by a man obsessed with the injustice he had fabricated in his mind. When arrested, Fortin showed no remorse. He calmly articulated the reasons why he had to commit these acts. To him, his parents, who raised him, and his former colleagues were all enemies, all responsible for his harsh fate. The Gabriel Fortin case is a terrifying warning about the danger of repressed hatred, especially when it transforms into a delusion of persecution. It shows how an educated man who once worked in high-tech industry can become a cold-blooded killing machine simply because he could not cope with personal failure. And most horrifyingly, it shows the ultimate betrayal of a son towards his parents, the very people who gave him life on the very anniversary of his father's life. For Fortin, blood ties could not stop the scythe of vengeance. Story 5. The Filthy Money Case. We head north now, to Toronto, Canada. This episode explores the dark side of luxury and power, where the heir to a vast empire was willing to kill anyone, including family, to satisfy his bottomless greed. This is the story of Dylan Millard. Dylan Millard was the sole heir to Millard Air, a large private aviation company worth millions of dollars. He grew up in wealth and privilege, but was constrained by an inner emptiness and a sick desire for control. He indulged in expensive cars, late-night parties, and above all, absolute power. The story began to unfold in 2012 with the disappearance of Laura Babcock. Laura was a beautiful young woman who had a romantic relationship with Millard. She wanted to make the relationship public, something Millard did not want. To him, Laura was a nuisance that needed to be eliminated. Millard, along with his best friend Mark Smitch, lured Laura and murdered her. They disposed of her body by burning it in an industrial incinerator that Millard owned. The case gained more notoriety in 2013 with the disappearance of Tim Bosma, a family man from Hamilton, Ontario. Bosma was trying to sell his new Dodge Ram truck. Millard and Smitch contacted Bosma under the guise of being buyers. Instead of buying the truck, they shot Bosma dead inside his own vehicle, then incinerated his body in the same industrial device used for Laura Babcock. Millard wanted the truck simply because he wanted it, a senseless act of brutality carried out to satisfy a momentary whim. However, the pinnacle of Millard's cruelty and greed lay in the death of his own father, Wayne Millard. In 2012, Wayne Millard, the founder of Millard Air, was found dead. Initially, police ruled it a suicide. Wayne died from a gunshot wound to the head. The case was quickly closed, and Dylan Millard inherited the entire company and his father's assets, a massive fortune. But detectives investigating the Laura Babcock and Tim Bosma cases began to see a link. They noticed the suspicious coincidence between Wayne's death and Dylan's resulting inheritance. They reopened Wayne Millard's case. The horrifying truth was exposed. Dylan Millard had staged his father's death to look like a suicide. He had coldly murdered his own father just months after killing Laura Babcock to seize control of the inheritance. The act of a son killing his father for inheritance money is the ultimate act of betrayal, especially when it occurs amidst a chain of other murders committed purely out of selfishness. Dylan Millard used his privilege and intelligence to cover up a series of heinous crimes, transforming him into a cold-blooded, conscienceless serial killer. The story of Dylan Millard is a chilling portrayal of the moral degradation caused by power and money. It shows how a man who had everything became a monster, willing to burn evidence and destroy family ties to get what he wanted. The case shocked Canada, reminding everyone that sometimes the most dangerous person is not a stranger, but the one sitting across the dinner table from you. Story 6. The Black Widow Wife. We traveled to Milan, Italy in the 1990s, a world of glamour, high fashion, and limitless power. This story is about the jealousy and possessiveness that drove one woman from a social icon to a cold-blooded killer. This is the story of Patrizia Reggiani and the Gucci Empire. Patrizia Reggiani was the ex-wife of Maurizio Gucci, the grandson of the famous Gucci fashion empire founder. They were once a power couple, living in absolute extravagance. Patrizia, with her sharp looks and strong personality, was dubbed Lady Gucci, always seeking validation and power alongside her husband. However, their marriage began to crumble in the 1980s when Maurizio decided to leave Patrizia for another woman. Patrizia was deeply wounded, not just by the betrayal, but by being stripped of the fame, social status, and power she had become accustomed to. She refused to accept the divorce and always considered Maurizio her sworn enemy. In 1993, Maurizio Gucci sold his entire stake in the company for a massive sum, completely severing the family's ties to the brand. This event not only enraged Patrizia, but also made her feel permanently excluded from the legacy she believed she deserved. Patrizia constantly harassed Maurizio, threatened him, and even called him a coward and a devil in letters. Patrizia's hatred reached its peak in 1995. On March 27, 1995, Maurizio Gucci was entering his office on Via Palestro in central Milan. He was shot 4 times from behind, 3 in the back, and 1 fatal shot to the head. He collapsed right on the steps. The assassin quickly fled. The case shocked all of Italy and the fashion world. Who dared to assassinate the heir to one of the world's most famous luxury brands? The investigation dragged on for 2 years without clear results, until a chance tip revealed the horrifying truth. Police discovered that Patrizia Reggiani was the mastermind. She had hired an old driver and bodyguard, Ivano Savioni, to find a hitman. Savioni, in turn, hired Benedetto Serrallo, an indebted mechanic, as the gunman. The motive was not financial. Patrizia had received a large alimony settlement after the divorce, but rather uncontrollable jealousy and rage. Patrizia could not tolerate the fact that Maurizio was about to marry his new partner, Paola Franchi, and that she would lose the Gucci title forever. Patrizia was arrested in 1997. During the trial, the press dubbed her the Black Widow. When asked why she didn't shoot Maurizio herself, Patrizia gave a chilling and famous reply. "My eyesight is not very good. I didn't want to miss." Patrizia Reggiani was sentenced to 29 years in prison. This case is a modern fairy tale turned horror story. Luxury, power, and fame concealing a soul corrupted by greed and envy. It is proof that in the world of the ultra-rich, possessiveness extends beyond assets to encompass the lives of others. Patrizia Reggiani wanted to control Maurizio's life even after he left her, and when she couldn't have him, she chose to destroy him. Story 7. The Malignant Tumor and False Compassion. We now travel to Germany, a nation known for its order and efficiency, yet the setting for a story of ultimate betrayal between close friends. This case exposes how an individual can exploit the weakness and kindness of others to satisfy their insatiable greed. The story revolves around 2 friends, a woman named Andrea and her close friend, a man named Andreas. Andrea was diagnosed with a severe, life-threatening form of cancer. In her desperation and vulnerability, she turned to friends in the community for support. Andreas, Andrea's closest friend, emerged as a guardian angel. He appeared immensely caring and devoted. Andreas took charge of organizing fundraising campaigns, appealing for charitable donations on social media and within the community to help Andrea cover her expensive medical costs. The community was moved by Andrea's story and Andreas's dedication, and donations poured in. However, the truth hidden behind that devotion was a sickening deception. Andreas was not a good friend. He was a fraud. He had impersonated Andrea to create the donation campaigns. He managed all the money received, and most of it never reached Andrea. Instead, Andreas used it to fund his extravagant lifestyle, traveling, purchasing expensive items, and even buying a new house. He exploited his best friend's vulnerability and pain for personal profit. As time passed, something unexpected happened. Andrea began to recover. Her cancer gradually went into remission thanks to medical intervention. For Andreas, this was not good news, but a catastrophe. Andrea's recovery meant she would soon be healthy enough to discover the truth about the missing donations. Andreas's entire network of deceit was at risk of being exposed. One dark night, Andreas decided there was only one way to keep this secret forever. Andrea had to die. He invited Andrea to his house under the guise of celebrating her recovery. There, Andreas brutally attacked his friend, murdered her, and subsequently attempted to dispose of her body. The case was uncovered when police investigated irregularities in Andrea's bank accounts and fundraising campaigns. Suspicion immediately fell upon Andreas, the closest friend and fund manager. When arrested, Andreas finally confessed to his crime. His confession detailed not only the murder, but also the years-long chain of fraudulent activities, using his friend's cancer diagnosis to enrich himself. This case shocked Germany because of its coldness and calculation. It was the ultimate betrayal, not only against a friend, but against all the kind-hearted donors. It shows how a person can conceal a malignant tumor within their soul, greed and inhumanity, behind a mask of compassion and devotion. And the greatest tragedy is, Andrea survived cancer, but she could not survive the betrayal of the friend she trusted the most. Story 8. The Christmas Tragedy in the Small Village. We now head north to Sweden, where the tranquility of a small village was torn apart by an unimaginable family tragedy, exposing the brutality hidden behind closed doors. We travel to a small, quiet village in Sweden, a country often regarded as a model for social welfare and a high quality of life. But even in the most advanced societies, the shadow of abuse and violence can lurk, particularly within family dynamics. This is the story of Lilla Hjärtat, Little Heart, the nickname given by the Swedish media to a 3-year-old girl named Esmeralda, who endured a painful and solitary death. Esmeralda was the daughter of a couple living in the small village in southwestern Sweden. She had spent time in a loving foster family after authorities decided to remove her from her biological parents' care due to suspected drug issues and an unsafe living environment. Under the foster family's care, Esmeralda thrived and was happy. However, everything changed tragically in late 2019. A controversial ruling by the appellate court mandated that local authorities return Esmeralda to her biological parents. This decision was made despite warnings from social workers regarding the child's safety. Upon returning to her biological parents, Esmeralda's life became a terrifying ordeal. Her parents, a man and a woman, described as irresponsible and struggling with addiction, locked the girl inside the house, completely isolating her from the outside world. She was denied food, systematically starved, and abused. On Christmas Eve 2019, the tragedy culminated. Esmeralda died from severe malnutrition and abuse. When discovered, her tiny body was heartbreakingly emaciated, indicating she had suffered prolonged pain for weeks. What made this case so shocking was not just the child's death, but the pure cruelty and callousness of her own parents. After her death, the couple did not report it, but instead attempted to conceal her body. They hid her remains in a suitcase and disposed of it near a forest. Weeks later, the father was found dead from a drug overdose, and the mother was arrested. The case of Lilla Hjärtat shook the entire Swedish social welfare system. It raised profound questions about the failure of the legal system and child protection agencies, who made the devastating mistake of returning the child to a dangerous environment. This story is a painful reminder that even in nations presumed to have the best safety nets, human cruelty can find a hidden corner to destroy the most innocent of lives. Esmeralda's death was not just a murder. It was an indelible stain on the social conscience. Story 9. The Broken Oath. We return to the American Midwest, specifically Bolingbrook, Illinois. This is the story of Drew Peterson, a police officer with a powerful, confident demeanor, a man who represented the law, yet was a murderer and a brazen cover-up artist. Drew Peterson was married 4 times. His final 2 wives were at the center of a horrifying mystery involving the abuse of power and domestic crime. Peterson's third wife, Kathleen Savio, was found dead in her bathtub in 2004. Investigators initially concluded that her death was an accident. Kathleen had slipped and drowned. As a police officer, Peterson knew exactly how to navigate investigations. He exploited his knowledge of legal procedures to ensure Kathleen's death was classified as a tragic accident. After Kathleen's death, Peterson quickly married his fourth wife, Stacy Peterson, a woman significantly younger than him. However, this marriage quickly descended into violence and control. Stacy grew fearful for her life, especially after she learned some suspicious details about Kathleen Savio's death. In October 2007, Stacy Peterson suddenly vanished. Drew Peterson told everyone that Stacy had left him for another man. As a police officer and a seemingly credible man, the public and some of his colleagues initially believed his story. However, Stacy's disappearance triggered a new wave of suspicion, forcing authorities to reopen Kathleen Savio's case. Prosecutors exhumed Kathleen's body and conducted a second autopsy. This time, the results proved that Kathleen Savio did not die accidentally. She was murdered. Evidence began mounting against Drew Peterson. He had used his police knowledge to stage Kathleen Savio's crime scene, ensuring her injuries appeared consistent with an accident. As for Stacy Peterson, her body was never found. However, testimony from her family and several witnesses painted a gruesome picture. Stacy had been preparing for divorce and had told a friend that if she died, to be certain Drew was the culprit. The case became a media nightmare. Drew Peterson, once a symbol of law enforcement, was now the focal point of public disgust. He was depicted as a ruthless manipulator, using his police badge to conceal his crimes. In 2012, Drew Peterson was convicted of murdering Kathleen Savio. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison. Yet, he has never been charged in Stacy's disappearance, even though all evidence points to him as the culprit. The story of Drew Peterson is the ultimate betrayal. It is not just the betrayal of a husband toward his wives, but the betrayal of a police officer toward his oath to protect the public. It shows the danger when authority and legal knowledge fall into the hands of a cold-blooded killer. The man who swore to uphold order and justice systematically dismantled it. Story 10. The Online Killer. We conclude our chilling journey in South Korea, a modern and highly connected nation. This episode explores a new kind of crime, made even more terrifying by its randomness and sick motivation. Murder for the sake of experiencing the feeling. This story revolves around Jung Yoo-jung, a young South Korean woman, and her victim, an English tutor. Jung Yoo-jung was a recluse, obsessed with true crime shows and detective novels. She spent most of her time online, researching methods of murder and how to dispose of a body without getting caught. She began to harbor a morbid idea, to experience the feeling of real murder. To carry out this dark intention, Jung Yoo-jung used online chat applications designed for strangers. She posed as a mother looking for a tutor for her daughter. After multiple contacts, she found her victim, a kind young English tutor living in Busan. On the day of the crime, Jung Yoo-jung did not meet the victim as a mother. Instead, she wore an old high school uniform, pretending to be a student in need of tutoring. This disguise, however bizarre, was accepted by the victim. Upon entering the victim's apartment, Jung Yoo-jung immediately attacked. She stabbed the victim over 100 times, an act of excessive and savage violence, revealing the cruelty and sick craving within her. After the murder, Jung Yoo-jung proceeded with her meticulously planned next steps: disposal of the body. She went out to buy trash bags and detergent, then dismembered the victim's body. She packed the body parts into a suitcase and called a taxi to dump them in a remote area near the Nakdong River. The case was discovered by accident. The taxi driver grew suspicious when he saw his young passenger carrying a blood-stained suitcase and dumping it in an isolated location late at night. He reported her to the police. When police arrested Jung Yu Jung, she showed no remorse. Initially, she tried to lie, claiming someone else had killed the victim. But eventually, the horrifying truth was exposed. Jung Yu Jung's motive was not money, jealousy, or personal vengeance. She killed simply because she wanted to know what it felt like to murder, to confirm whether what she read in books and saw on TV matched real life. This was a crime driven by intrinsic motivation, a sick test of her own limits. This case shocked South Korea and the world, becoming a terrifying warning about the danger lurking behind phone screens. It shows how one person can be completely corrupted by violent content online and turn into a cold-blooded killer, murdering a complete stranger simply to satisfy her morbid curiosity. This is a tragedy of the digital age, where the line between reality and fantasy is blurred, leading to completely senseless destruction of life.